A top U.S. security analyst visits Taiwan. We find out what he thinks about the country's defense. Is your wallet full? Well, new data shows that the average wage hasn't moved much. Outrage from Beijing as the EU imposes tariffs on electric vehicles. Plus, a common ingredient in food here might not be so common anymore. We find out why. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. New figures show the average salary in Taiwan rose slightly in the first 4 months of the year, but not all sectors are seeing the same growth. John Van Trieste reports.
Some good news for workers in Taiwan. The latest government figures show many employees are earning slightly more these days. From January to April, the average salary was just over $1,400 a month. And though inflation ate up much of these gains, total earnings, including bonuses, came out to around $2,000 a month for the average worker, an increase of more than 1% from the same period last year.
外需的一些需求带动之下，其实我们在经常性薪资跟总薪资的这个部分，它的增幅其实都是有一定的成长幅度。
Demand for workers is also high. Job search platforms are listing over 1 million unfilled positions in the country, which has a population of around 23 million people. But some sectors are seeing much higher salaries than others. Much of the growth has been in the tech industry.
目前的就业数来看，全台湾大概22000个工作数是属于半导体产业的。AI 的人才需求，现在每个月也有24000个工作数，人才需求这样，薪资就会比较上涨。
In semiconductors and AI, the average worker takes home around $1,700 a month. That's less than IT and finance workers, but several hundred more than workers in hospitality or manufacturing. Taiwan's leading tech research institute predicts a bonanza year for the semiconductor industry, with production worth over $158 billion, up nearly 18% from last year, meaning the gap may widen still. Ryan Wu and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
The EU has announced steep tariffs on electric vehicle imports from China, sparking anger in Beijing. Harel Hughes reports.
A small taxi stopping to recharge before its next journey. It's one of millions of electric vehicles made in the last few years, a small part of a huge global market, worth billions, and dominated by one country, China. The market is now flooded with the country's electric vehicles, their prices kept low by Chinese state subsidies. But there are concerns over human rights, market dominance, and Beijing's influence. After a year-long investigation into the value chain of EV batteries, the EU has become the latest region to announce a tariff hike on China's EV industry.
In particular, this value chain benefits from unfair subsidiarization, which is causing a threat of economic injury to EU battery electric vehicles producers. On this basis, the Commission has reached out to the Chinese authorities to discuss these findings and explore possible ways for resolving the issues identified.
Europe already has provisional tariffs on electric vehicles from China, set at 10%. But now they could go up to as much as 38%. If Europe's concerns aren't resolved, they'll be enforced on July 4th, and the effects will be felt across the global industry.
The range between 20% all the way to 38.1% is really a huge burden on not only the Chinese car exporters, but also on those the buyers, dealers, distributors, eventually.
This is the second announcement of tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles in the past month. In May, U.S. President Joe Biden slapped import duties on China's electric vehicles, batteries, solar cells, steel, aluminum, and medical equipment, effectively blocking almost all Chinese electric vehicles going into the U.S. With the addition of the EU's investigation and tariffs, Beijing is not happy.
欧方以此为由，对自中国进口的电动汽车加征关税，违背市场经济原则和国际贸易规则，损害中欧经贸合作和全球汽车产供链的稳定，最终也会损害欧洲自身的利益。
Electric vehicles are in high demand around the world. But with China dominating the industry, global leaders have decided the price of these vehicles is not worth the price of their own auto industries. Chris Ma and Harel Hughes for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's global edge in semiconductors is getting even stronger. Production value is expected to expand 17% this year compared to 2023. According to Taiwan's leading tech research institute, the production value of chips is set to grow from $131 billion last year to $154 billion this year, a record high. The growth is being put down to booming demand for AI chips, which will be used in consumer electronics as new products like AI personal computers hit the market. A former U.S. National Security Advisor has arrived in Taiwan to meet with President Lai Ching-te. Matthew Pottinger has been outspoken about the risks he says China poses to the international community, and especially to Taiwan. We can get more now from Rhys Ayres, who is live for us in Taipei. Rhys, just who is Matt Pottinger and what have he and Lai been discussing?
Well, Yin, as you mentioned, Pottinger served as the Deputy National Security Advisor to former US President Donald Trump. That was from 2019 to 21. Now he serves as the chair of the China program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. That's a think tank based in Washington, D.C. But despite not currently holding any kind of official political position, Pottinger remains a prominent voice on the subject of China, and also he's pretty fluent in Mandarin Chinese. And he often speaks to the threats that Beijing poses to global stability. His meeting with Lai was a closed-door meeting, but prior to that, both of them made some public statements that may give us a clue as to what was discussed.
One of the lessons of the war that's happening in Ukraine right now is that deterrence would be much cheaper than war. Deterrence is cheaper than war. And I know that President Lai is one who understands the principle of peace through strength, and that's the principle that should give all of us confidence that Taiwan can effectively deter aggression from nearby countries.
Nearby countries there, obviously referring to China. Now, based on Pottinger's comments and from a press release from Taiwan's presidential office, we know that they talked about cross-strait relations. They also talked about trade and economic ties between the US and Taiwan, and also about regional security. Pottinger has previously spoken at length about how the US can do much more to support its allies in the region, like Taiwan, by, for example, providing more arms. But as his comments there also show us, Pottinger believes that prevention may be the best medicine. The word that he used was deterrence. And with more investment from the US and a stronger united front against China, a major conflict in the Asia-Pacific region can be avoided.
Well, let's hope Mr. Pottinger is right, Rhys. Thanks for the updates. That was Rhys Ayres reporting live from Taipei. Taiwan has reported 23 Chinese military aircraft and 7 naval ships operating around the country in the span of 24 hours. 19 of the aircraft were spotted breaching the country's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. This airspace is not part of Taiwan, but is used by the military as a defensive buffer zone. Among the group of aircraft, a military drone was also spotted circling around, coming from the southwestern corner of Taiwan towards the east coast. Taiwan's military says it's monitoring the situation and has deployed air defense systems. Mountains of dumped mattresses in central Taiwan are putting pressure on the area's waste systems. Taichung's Environmental Protection Agency says an average of 6,000 mattresses have been thrown away every month this year, leading to a pile of 11,000 waiting to be processed. 26,000 have already been removed. The city's growing population and problems with processing facilities are being blamed for the backlog, with locals frustrated at the lack of solutions.
当然夸张了啊，太恐怖了，这个要回收的问题也是很麻烦的。
Now, lotus seeds appear in many dishes in Taiwan, but climate change may soon take them off the menu. Farmers say changes in the lotus plant's flowering process are causing a decline in seed production. Wesley Lewis reports.
It's harvesting season for lotus seeds in Tainan, southern Taiwan. Most summers, ponds here are packed with flowering lotus plants, but this year is different. Farmers say unusual weather patterns in recent months have halved their crop yield.
那时候没有下雨，在开花的话，开花的成数会非常的不好。我们都是要靠这个蜜蜂下去授粉。在于今年的话，也不知道蜜蜂不是减少很多了。我们正常，我们莲蓬有20几颗，20-30颗。在今年的话，不过剩10几颗。
Lotus farmers say the plants have a delicate flowering process, sensitive to changing weather conditions. With climate change fueling drier weather and fewer bees around to pollinate flowers, lotus plants aren't producing as many seeds. Lotus seeds are a common ingredient in many local dishes, but with smaller harvests, prices have already gone up in markets and restaurants.
原本10斤是900，那涨到950。那因为原物料一直涨啊，白糖啊也都一直涨价，所以预期今年也是有可能还会再涨这样子。
Tainan grows many of the lotus seeds consumed in the country. This year, local farmers have dedicated nearly 200 hectares to the lotus plant cultivation. But as climate change worsens, lotus seed farmers here are hoping their crop yields and businesses won't wither away, along with their plants. Eason Chen and Wesley Lewis for TaiwanPlus.
Coming up after the break, we head down to a museum in Yilan where coral art is trying to pull a dying industry out of deep water. Stay tuned to find out more.
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world. Charted by the freest country in Asia.
5, 4, 3, 2.
A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Taiwanese semiconductor giant TSMC.
Public buses to be electric by 2030. A mission that begins with listening.
And telling the stories of Taiwan.
In Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Drawing insight from original thinkers.
And sharing it with the world. TaiwanPlus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.
For more stories from Taiwan and the Paris Olympics, download the TaiwanPlus app.
Welcome back to a new season where we will be interviewing representatives of different countries and chambers of commerce.
This is the best, and that's the abaya. This is years by years for all the generation.
I'm gonna offer you macaron. Taiwanese and French.
Belize has the second largest barrier reef in the world.
Marine life there is crazy.
We spend like the whole day there, we're eating, drinking, playing chess.
I don't want to stay here anymore. I want to buy a ticket and fly out. In Taiwan, I discovered not only oolong tea, it's also the first cultural tea house of Taipei.
So there's a lot of interesting things here that helps me get in touch with my heritage and culture.
Here you can make some amazing local food and
all new season. Wow Taiwan. Every Friday, 8:15 p.m. on TaiwanPlus.
You're watching TaiwanPlus News, the voice of freedom in Asia.
At Connected, we believe in the power of dialogue. not just about the headlines, it's about finding common ground. Join the conversation.
Connected with Divya Gopalan on TaiwanPlus.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. China and New Zealand have signed agreements on trade and climate change as the Chinese premier makes a rare visit to the country. Protesters and supporters gathered in the capital, Wellington, as Li Qiang arrived in New Zealand. The country has been toughening its stance on China and suggesting it poses a threat to security in the Pacific. More eyes will be on Li's next stop. He's heading to Australia on Saturday. China and Australia are trying to mend their damaged relationship. For more on that, TaiwanPlus reporter Louise Watt spoke to Graham Smith, a senior fellow in the Department of Pacific Affairs at Australian National University.
This is the first visit of a Chinese premier to Australia since 2017. What are we expecting to come out of it?
I think as someone famously said, most of diplomacy is about showing up, and this is largely about showing up. I don't think there's going to be a lot of ground given on either side. Positives on the Australian side, we're hoping that the last remaining Chinese trade restrictions on lobster and crayfish get removed. There's also a lot of focus on a couple of pandas that are due to return to China, and whether they'll stay on or be replaced. That seems to be a big focus on the Australian side. On the Chinese side, there's a hope that we'll be more open to Chinese investments in strategic minerals such as lithium. But again, I don't think there's a lot of hope on that front.
Trade is set to dominate the meetings between Albanese and Li, but in recent years, Australia has been strengthening defence ties with the United States. So how likely is this to put a strain on the relationship?
Yeah, I think China largely accepts this is how the alliance system works. We're in a military alliance with the US. We have been for a long time. And China, I think, long ago accepted that, this is just the way things are done. And I think on both sides, the buzzword is stabilisation, so to stabilise the relationship, which got extremely rocky from about 2017 onwards.
And why have relations improved since that rock-bottom time when China imposed trade tariffs on Australia because it called for an independent investigation into the origins of COVID?
Yeah, I think things have improved since the new Labor government came to power, but in some ways the arrival of a new government gave China an excuse to do what I think it had wanted to do for some time, largely for domestic reasons, as is always the case with China. Economically, they didn't get the bounce back from COVID that they were hoping for. And so having a compromised trade relationship with an important partner like Australia wasn't really in its own national interests. And nor was it really in its interest to have what it sees as a close ally of the United States, and having, in the case of Australia, quite legitimate trade grievances, many of which were going to be ruled on by the World Trade Organization. So that in itself would have been a bad look, and explains why many of these sanctions have been dropped.
That was Graham Smith of Australian National University talking to Louise Watt. 4 Russian Navy ships have arrived in Cuba ahead of joint military exercises in the Caribbean. The vessels, including a frigate and a nuclear-powered submarine, are anchored in Havana Harbor, about 160 kilometers from Key West in the U.S. state of Florida. Russia and Cuba are longtime allies, but the visit is seen as a show of force amid tensions with West over the war in Ukraine. U.S. officials say they are monitoring the visit closely, but that it does not pose a threat to their country's security. Leaders of the Group of 7 nations are set to announce $50 billion in aid to Ukraine, taking advantage of seized Russian assets. The money would come from accrued interest on $325 billion that was frozen when Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, and would be delivered to Ukraine by the end of the year. US President Joe Biden has been pressuring fellow G7 countries to agree to the move. The US separately said it would sign a security agreement with Kyiv to lock in American support for a decade. A joint U.S. Taiwan weather satellite system has fallen closer to Earth in the past couple of years, affecting its ability to collect and send back data. But how do you get satellites to stay in place? Sandy Chi investigates.
This is Formosat 7, a joint satellite project between Taiwan's National Space Agency and the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's a constellation of 6 remote sensing microsatellites, collecting atmospheric data for weather prediction and conduct climate, atmosphere, and gravity research. The system was launched from Florida in 2019 and placed in orbit 550 kilometers above Earth. However, since 2022, it struggled to stay in position.
运行的高度是会慢慢的下降。那在我们在2022年以前，我们平均卫星高度下降是每年大概2公里，但是在2022年以后，我们卫星到现在就是2年半的时间，已经下降了40公里。
The drop is partly due to the solar magnetic cycle, an 11-year periodic change in the sun's activity.
太阳黑子爆炸的时候，那就是产生所谓叫电浆云，然后它会随着太阳风出来，然后到地球磁场时会挤压磁场。 也就会造成我们的极光，也就大量的沉降的粒子。这时候，你的福卫7号任何一架人造卫星去，你都会受到它的阻滞。
The problem is, Formosat 7 can only take accurate atmospheric measurements at a certain altitude. It means scientists need to make sure the satellites stay in place by releasing gas from the internal cylinders to push them higher again. In 2023, they did this twice, increasing the altitude by 15 kilometers. And it's not the only problem caused by the solar cycle. High-speed and high-energy particles generated by the solar storms and other space weather changes can also affect the satellite's electronics.
还是会有一些异常事件的发生。那异常事件的话，我们就是直接把卫星关机，然后让它重启，或者让卫星进入安全模式，然后我们再去做后续的一个侦测的动作。如果卫星正常的话，我们再让卫星重新运作。这2年来，其实发生的频率有些微的增加，但是我们都能够很快的去解决它。
Despite the issues, Formosat 7 still sends back about 4,000 pieces of data each day, which is a big help for weather forecasting, climate observation, and monitoring conditions in space. James Lin and Sandy Chi for TaiwanPlus.
A museum in northeast Taiwan is showcasing some of the country's last red coral sculptures. Irene Lin looks at how one family is keeping a fading art afloat after years of overfishing.
Miniature streets, houses, and people, all carved out of red coral. Their creator, 77-year-old Lai Ching-te, is one of the last coral sculptors in the country. Over 25 years, he sought ways to sustain the dying art in his seaside hometown of Yilan in northeast Taiwan.
当我接触到雕刻的时候，我就一直思索了怎么样跳脱，怎么样去跳脱以外销为导向的那一种商业的作品。
Lai's works are made using a precious deep-sea coral called red coral. Red coral was once commonly harvested for use in jewelry, but is now endangered thanks to overfishing and pollution. Taiwan saw red coral exports boom from the start of the 20th century during the Japanese colonial era, and trade peaked in the 1970s. Yilan's subtropical climate made it the center of the trade. Lai's family was among many who made their living from the so-called red gold. But as he saw demand grow, he realized red coral was a finite resource, and things needed to change before it ran out.
再多的珊瑚都被外国人买去了，我就在想说，那这种珊瑚，那我们自己不用留一点下来吗？可是每一次一跟人家提到这件东西，这件事情，说我们要保留一些珊瑚，人家都打枪的啦。 他说：“珊瑚海里面抓就有了啦。”
Lai's nephew Chen Qi-wen shares this view, but he also thinks it's important to keep a traditional craft alive.
因为传统的物件吼，伊较脆，溜溜啊，伊就会闭哩，吼，爱是会长尔呢，啊，就尽量甲 利用这个材料，所有我家利用好安尼。真少人会来学这啊，真的很少了，算夕阳工业了。
But it's not just the art that is disappearing. The coral is disappearing too. Red coral sculptures like those in the Lai family may soon lack the raw material they need.
这珊瑚它这样长拇指粗这样就要长80到100年。那毕竟我们已经抓100年了，对不对？它会慢慢的枯竭，所以我觉得当然第一件事情就是过于，就抓太多了，但是珊瑚来不及长。
Lai Yuanyuan is Lai Rongxing's son. He says his father's craft, the fishing industry, and the coral all need protecting.
对我们来讲，我们的目标并不是希望有一天把海里面所有的珊瑚都抓走，我们是希望说，也许我父亲这一代他做珊瑚的工艺，我的小孩子也许也有机会可以做到这个行业。
The Lai family believes people need a deeper understanding of both the industry and the ecosystem. Only then can Taiwan ensure that red coral and its sculptors have a future, and that this museum in Yilan will still have these eye-popping works of art. Klein Wang and Irene Lin for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. Finally, check out these art pieces from Art Basel in Switzerland, one of Europe's largest art fairs. I'm Yin Khvat. Take care. See you next time.